Good day, everyone. Welcome back to our daily lesson. And today we are going to study about the state and its elements. So we are going to define what a state is. And out of the definition, we are going to identify the four elements that make a state a state. So let us have a rundown of the definition of the state. So what is a state? According to political scientist James W. Garner, a state is a community of persons, more or less numerous, permanently occupying a definite portion of a territory, independent of external control, and possessing an organized government to which the great body of inhabitants render habitual obedience. So out of the definitions of the state, we are going to deduce, we are going to get the elements by dissecting the phrases embodied in that definition. First, it is a community of persons. How many? More or less numerous. Second phrase, permanently occupying a definite portion of a territory. Then it is independent of external control. And number four, possessing an organized government to which the great body of inhabitants render habitual obedience. So these are the four phrases which we got from the definition of the state in the earlier slide. So out of these four phrases, we are now going to identify what are the four elements that make a state a state. First, people. From that definition given, which is more or less numerous. So this is the first element, people. The second element is territory, which is occupying a definite portion of the territory uh, from that particular phrase. Then sovereignty, freedom from foreign control, and of course, number four, government. So what is people? When we say people, these are the inhabitants of the state. You and I belong to this element. We belong to the people of the state. We are the inhabitants of the state. So when you ask, what is the first element of the state? The first element of the state is people. And when you are asked, who are these people? They are the inhabitants of the state. Actually, people is considered as the most important element of the state because the three other elements of the state were are run by the people. So it is very important that there are people in the state. So example for the United States of America, there are Americans. They are the people of the state of America. For the Filipinos, we have the Philippine state and the people are called Filipinos. For Thailand, we have the Thai people, the Chinese people for China, the Finnish for Finland, and of course the English for the people in England. So they are the people. Maybe you are asking how many people are needed in order for a state to exist. If you are going to go back to the definition of what a state is, the first phrase there says that more or less numerous. So there is no exact number of people required in order for a state to exist. It is actually a combination of more or less enough to copulate, enough to reproduce in order for the state to exist, or big enough in order to protect and to preserve the integrity of the state. So that's one thing that is being required for people. It does not need to be many, but of course, for China, with more than 1 billion population, well, that is their population, more than 1 billion. They are called the state. For Philippines, we are more than 100,000 in population. So the 100,000 people or more than 100,000 people are the people of the Republic of the Philippines. Or it could be less than 1,000, less than 1,000, such as in the case of Vatican City. Why? In Vatican City, mostly are priests and nuns. They do not copulate and therefore they do not reproduce rapidly, except for the visiting nuns and priests coming from other parts of the globe. That's the people of the Vatican City. But Vatican City is a state, even though the people there is less than 1,000. So there is no particular number of people required in order for the state to exist. It could be as big as the population of China or lesser than the population of Vatican. The second element is territory. Coming from the second phrase of the definition is territory. When we say territory, it is the place or the area where the inhabitants of the state live. So it is the place or area where the inhabitants of the state live. Without the territory, where are you going to place? Where are we going to place the people? So the people of the state live in the territory. So territory is measured from north to south. For example, in the case of the Republic of the Philippines, the farthest north island is Yami Island, Yami, and Salwag, the southernmost territory. So we identify our territory from north to south, and of course from east to west. We do not have that much problem with our eastern part because that is part of the vast Pacific Ocean. But we do have overlapping problem because of the overlapping claim in the western portion of the territory of the Republic of the Philippines, particularly in the West Philippine Sea, where we have issues of territorial dispute. We call the territorial dispute with our neighboring giant, the China. So we cannot just give it up. We need to protect our territory from north to south, from east to west, and even in the secondary lines or secondary areas, not just in the primary north to south, east to west, even in the secondary areas. So, what comprises a territory? Maybe you are asking, with this kind of setup or equation or size of the Republic of the Philippines, what does it comprises to be called a territory of the Republic of the Philippines, since we are speaking with the Republic of the Philippines? What comprises a territory? If you are going to define our Philippine territory, we need to go back to the Article 1 of the 1987 Philippine Constitution. The 1987 Philippine Constitution Article 1 states that the national territory comprises the Philippine archipelago, with all the islands and waters embraced therein, and all other territories over which the Philippines has sovereignty or jurisdiction, consisting of its terrestrial, fluvial, and aerial domains, including its territorial sea, the seabed, the subsoil, the insular shelves, and other submarine areas. The waters around, between, and connecting the islands of the archipelago, regardless of their breadth and dimensions, form part of the internal waters of the Philippines. So that is quoted from Article 1 of the 1987 Constitution. So the Philippines is an archipelago. Why do we need to know, and why do we need to understand that since the Philippines is an archipelago, we need to measure it, we need to enclose it in an imaginary enclosure through an imaginary lines in order for us to become one solid Republic of the Philippines. The Philippines is signatory to the United Nations Conventions on the Law of the Sea in January 10, 1982 in Jamaica, to which we agree, and we define our territory as an archipelago. So what do we mean by an archipelago? So let us now define what is an archipelago. Because in the case of the Republic of the Philippines and other archipelago countries or state, we define archipelago in this definition. Archipelago is a group of islands surrounded by waters. So imagine the Republic of the Philippines with small, big islands. The biggest island is Luzon, followed by the island of Mindanao, and of course, the third island is in Panay. So, plus small and smaller and smallest islands. We have 7,107 islands as reported, but there are newly discovered islands totaling to about 856. So that is an additional to the existing 7,107 islands. And we are second only in the number of islands to that of the Republic of Indonesia. Indonesia has more than 13,000 islands, while Philippines more than 7,000 islands only. Or the other way around, you can define archipelago as that portion of the water sprinkled with islands. So, whatever, it is an archipelago. So, the Republic of the Philippines as an archipelago state, we adhere to the archipelagic doctrine set forth in the United Nations Convention on the Laws of the Sea, or the UNCLOS, to which we won against that of the claim of nine-dash line of the Republic of China. Now, out also of the definition given to us in Article 1 of the 1987 is an internal water. So what is this internal water based on the Article 1 of the 1987 Constitution? The waters around between and connecting the islands of the archipelago, regardless of their breadth and dimensions. If you are imaginative enough of the political map of the Republic of the Philippines, you can see there that the Republic of the Philippines is enclosed in an imaginary lines called the archipelagic boundaries. Now, the waters inside of that archipelago doctrine of that archipelagic lines are called internal waters, because these waters are around, between, and connecting the islands. Prior to the archipelago doctrine, the waters around, between, and connecting the islands are considered as international water. And therefore, since it is an international water, everybody can navigate therein, everybody can enter therein, which is to the detriment of the coastal state like the Republic of the Philippines. If we will not be adhering to the archipelago doctrine, what will happen to us? The waters between Albay, or the waters between Sorsogon and Masbate, will be considered as that of an international water, and therefore everybody can enter therein, not only the Filipinos. But because of the archipelago doctrine, the waters around, between, and connecting the islands, regardless of their breadth and dimension, whatever is their size, then that form part of the internal water. And that is why under the archipelago doctrine, it seems that uh, we are but one landmass from Apari to Hulo, or from north to south. We are just but one landmass because of the archipelago doctrine. The waters around, between, and connecting the islands considered as one solid ground, including the land territory of the Republic of the Philippines. How about a terrestrial territory, which is also mentioned in Section 1 of Article 1 of the 1987 Constitution? Well, a terrestrial territory is defined as consisting of all land territories. So, all land territories, whatever is their form, is part of the terrestrial territory. So, it could be a mountain, a tallest mountain like that of the Mount Apo. It could be a volcano like the beautiful volcano of Albay, the Mayon volcano. It could be a valley like that of the valley in Benguet, or it could be a plain, a vast plain as that of the plain in central Luzon, or it could also be a plateau, a mountain. So these are examples of land territories which comprises the terrestrial territory of the state. In the case of the Republic of the Philippines, that is our land from Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao. All the lands therein is part of our terrestrial territory. How about a fluvial territory? Fluvial territory is consisting of all small bodies of water. Example, lake, canal, or for example, in the Bicol region, there is that Bicol River connecting to the many uh, small rivers in the Bicol region, or the longest river in Cagayan. These rivers, just but the small bodies of water, the canal, the lake, the falls, this is part of the fluvial, or these are part of the fluvial territory of the state. And remember, if it is not in the small bodies of water, there can be no fluvial procession, because if it will be in the maritime territory, then it will be in the Pacific Ocean. So, fluvial territory consisting of all small bodies of water like lake, canal, and others. How about a maritime territory? Maritime territory is consisting of the portion of large bodies of water, example, part of the ocean or of the sea. So, our maritime territory in the eastern part of the Republic of the Philippines, mainly portion of the Pacific Ocean, where most of the typhoons are coming in, while in the western portion of the Philippines, there is that West Philippine Sea, the South China Sea, the Sulu Sea. So these are part of the maritime territory of the Republic of the Philippines. How about aerial territory? The aerial territory is consisting of the airspace above the maritime, the fluvial, and the terrestrial territory. There are some authorities saying that the end of the aerial territory is where the outer space begins. So, if it is the beginning of the outer space, that is already the end of the aerial territory. So, as a territory, the sovereign state can implement, can enforce the laws within the state. For example, in the case of the Republic of the Philippines, above the airs, above the terrestrial, above the fluvial and the maritime territory, thus the Philippines as a state can always enforce protection of its territory. Hence, any entry, illegal entry in the airspace, except for emergency landing, for commercial and other permitted landing and entry, the Republic of the Philippines, through the Philippine Air Force, can gun down illegal entry in the airspace of the Republic of the Philippines. The same in other territorial um, part like terrestrial, fluvial, and maritime territories. Also, in Article 1 of the 1987 Philippine Constitution, you can also see there the word territorial sea. What is this territorial sea? Well, a territorial sea is that portion of the sea or of the ocean measured 12 nautical miles from the baseline to which a coastal state exercises sovereignty. The territorial sea is measured 12 nautical miles. So imagine again, as I do not have it in the slide presentation that I have now, the Republic of the Philippines is enclosed in an imaginary archipelagic baseline. That is where you are going to start counting that 12 nautical miles from the baseline. So that imaginary enclosure to the Republic of the Philippines, that is the baseline. You count it there, 12 nautical miles from that is the territorial sea. Now, in the territorial sea, the sovereign state exercises sovereignty. So therefore, nobody can enter the territorial sea of the Republic of the Philippines without asking permission from the Republic of the Philippines. So it means to say that they can only enter the territorial sea of the Republic of the Philippines without permission in cases of emergency. For example, uh, there is a typhoon and there is a need for a vessel to dock for the meantime, in order for the typhoon to pass by, or there is an emergency that the vessel need to refuel, those are the only cases that they can enter the territorial sea during emergency cases, but not during, or but not any time without the permission of the Republic of the Philippines. There are cases where a big vessel dock in our Philippine seaport because of the Balikatan exercises. Well, that is part of the Balikatan exercises. There is an agreement, a treaty to that effect. Then the visiting forces can enter the Philippine territorial sea in pursuance to that existing agreement or treaty. Then we also have, as mentioned in Article 1 of the Philippine Constitution, a contiguous zone. So what is a contiguous zone? Contiguous zone is that portion of the sea measured 24 nautical miles. So the territorial sea is measured 12 nautical miles. The contiguous zone is measured 24. TS 12, CZ or contiguous zone 24 nautical miles from the baseline or 12 nautical miles at the end of the territorial sea. What is the role or power of the coastal state within the 24 nautical miles contiguous zone? The coastal state, for example, the Republic of the Philippines, can exercise control to prevent the infringement of its customs. So within the 24 nautical miles, the Republic of the Philippines, as for example, the case is, can implement prevention on the infringement of its customs. For example, there are some who pass through back door. So when we say back door, it is not passing through the regular customs and therefore not paying the rightful customs duties, tariffs, etc. So the Philippines as a state can implement prevention in the infringement of its customs laws. What else? Fiscal. So even collection of taxes can be run through by the Philippine government within the 24 nautical miles contiguous zone. Or the immigration laws, as there are aliens without papers or documents and yet they are in yacht, nasa yate, in yacht, and then passing through the 24 nautical miles, the Republic of the Philippines as a state can implement the immigration law within the 24 nautical miles and of course can apprehend aliens without proper documents while they are in the yacht or within the 24 nautical miles. And sanitary laws. So there are reports before wherein the Republic of the Philippines become the trash republic, coming from Canada, coming from Korea and other neighboring countries, seemingly a custom due container, and yet upon opening, trash. But sad to say, I don't know what happened to the enforcement of that pronouncement of President Duterte that the same should be returned to the country to which it originates. Now that is the contiguous zone, the 24 nautical mile from the baseline of the state over which the coastal state exercises control to prevent the infringement of its customs, fiscal, immigration, and sanitary laws. And then also we have that so-called exclusive economic zone. Under the UNCLOS, or the United Nations Convention on the Laws of the Sea, an exclusive economic zone is that part of the sea extending up to 200 nautical miles over which a sovereign state has special rights regarding the exploration and exploitation of marine resources, including the installation of artificial islands and energy production. So that is the 200 nautical miles exclusive economic zone. For example, the Malampaya gas station is an offshore and within the exclusive economic zone of the Republic of the Philippines. And also, the reason why there are overlapping claims in the South China Sea and in the West Philippine Sea, it is because also of the definition of an exclusive economic zone, which cross over with one another, which has claim in some of the portions or in some of the territories of the West Philippines and the South China Sea. So let's move to the third element of the state, which is the government. What is meant by government? Government is the aggregate of authorities to which the will of the state is formulated and carried out. So sometimes it is called the bureaucracy. This is where the people of the state transact business. The government of the Republic of the Philippines, for example, is run by chosen representatives coming from the different islands of the state, coming from the different districts. We have the lower house coming from all over the Philippines. We have the Senate and of course the president and the vice president elected. They run the government. And the people there formulate policies. They carried it out and implement to the whole state, to the whole nation of the Republic of the Philippines. So that's the government. Government could be ruled by none. So is there such a government where no one ruled and yet could be called a government? We will study further as we discuss further the prepared slides. Or it could be a government ruled by one, government ruled by few, or government ruled by many. So a government could be like that. What is a government by none? Example of government by none is anarchy. What is the characteristics of an anarchic government? One is lawless violence. If there is no particular ruler in a government, there could be anarchy. There could be lawless violence. There could be killing from one to another, burning one to another, arson, etc., rape. That is lawless violence because of an anarchic government. There could be chaos. That is what will happen if there will be no ruler in the government, when there is no proper rule in the government that is being followed. Or it could be a government ruled by one person. Example and most famous is monarchy. However, class, monarchy have changes in time. If before, when we say, before there is this saying, ang utos ng hari ay hindi kailanman nababali. That is part of the monarchical government ruled by one person. But through times, this, this kind of government has been the subject of many changes, changes upon changes, that we see the present monarchical government as that limited rather than the absolute one. So a monarchy could be absolute or limited or constitutional. It is an absolute monarchy where the words of the monarch, the king, the queen, are rule to the people, to the subject. That is an absolute monarchy. That whatever the monarch says, everybody should follow. Otherwise, they will be meted with penalty. Worse, they will be meted with death. That is the absolute monarchy, where the king or the queen, the monarch for that example, exercises the three branches of government. They make the laws, they enact the laws, they implement the laws, and they interpret the laws for themselves. That's the absolute monarchy. But upon review of the present monarchies in the entire um, globe, the entire world, you can see that most of the monarchies are limited monarchy or constitutional monarchy. Take, for example, the monarchy in the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Queen Elizabeth II is no longer that one that represent or the one that runs the government. The monarch, Queen Elizabeth II, is just but a symbol of the monarchical government of the United Kingdom. And that is why the function of the monarch is more on a ceremonial function rather than of a head of the government or governmental function. That's why in a monarchical system of government, under a limited or constitutional monarchy, there are two heads. One is the head of the state, and the second is the head of the government. The head of the state is usually the monarch, where the function is usually ceremonial. When there is a ceremony, they have the function. When there is no ceremony, they don't have a function at all. But there is the second head, which is the head of the government, who runs the affair of the government, who execute the laws, who made the laws work in the government. That's the head of the government. And in the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, the head of the government is the prime minister. The prime minister. So that is absolute versus limited or constitutional monarchy. Then there is also this government ruled by few persons. Example is oligarchy. Oligarchy are the few chosen rich people. They are the oligarchs. Usually they run business, they run the economy. That's the oligarchy. And during the State of the Nation address of President Duterte in the fourth Monday of July of 2020, he made mention of the oligarchs. Well, in a country like the Republic of the Philippines, where most of the leaders were chosen by the people, oligarchs are just but mere contributor of the selection of the leaders in the government. However, since they run big businesses, they have plenty of people, and that is why they can also twist their mind by letting them vote according to those people who has supported the business of the oligarch, who has made the oligarch richer because this oligarch, though they are not sitting in the government, they are not running the affairs of the government, they place also people who can run the government for themselves. So this is oligarchy, the rule of the rich, the famous, the elites. And why is it belong to the government ruled by few person? Because they are not so many, they are only few, but yet they can change the time, they can change the events, they can remove one president to another. That's the oligarchs. They are few, but they are powerful. Or it could be a junta. An example of a junta is a military junta. So they are just but few, but they can also revolt. They can stage a revolution against the government. If they failed to overthrow the government, they will be subjected to cases for coup d'etat or other. But if they were able to throw, they just but few, but they were be able to throw the government, they run the government, then they are few, but they are powerful few. That's the military junta. And of course, we have a government ruled by many. A government ruled by many is a government where the voice of the people is the supreme power. Example of this is democracy. The word democracy comes from the root word demo, which means demos, which means people. So democracy is a government of the people. That's why I would like to share with you a famous definition of the word democracy from that of the definition of Abraham Lincoln in his famous Gettysburg Address. During that time, the United States of America is under a civil war. It is a civil war because there is a war between the white and the black people of America. And it was during the time of Abraham Lincoln when these black people were emancipated from their situation. They become equal before the eyes of the law and before each other. Prior to the emancipation of the slaves, black people are considered as a commodity. They can be sold anytime. They can be the subject of a buy and sell. If you were able to read Harriet Beecher Stowe's book, Uncle Tom's Cabin, you can read there the main character of Tom, who is from Africa, and were sold from one to another as if a commodity, a good in the market that can be sold anytime. And that during the time of President Lincoln, he made the famous speech in the Gettysburg, and that is now the Gettysburg Address, where he defined democracy as a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. However, in this present situation, this government of the people is changing in its definition. Instead of spelled OF, it's becoming OFF. The people whom they elected can no longer be found. Doors of their houses are closed. Office do not accept visitors. When you see them in the public, they were off to the people. Much more, they have the reason in this time of pandemic not to see them because of the fear of contracting a COVID-19 case or disease. Instead of by the people, BY. O, tingnan nyo na mali na tuloy sa slide. It's BUY. instead of by the people, which is BY, it's becoming a BUY, by the people. Very rampant. There are so many reports that during elections, people are being bought in order to vote for a politician or to a person, especially if that candidate is not worthy of the position. But because they are buying people, because they have the money to buy the people, then the people are also accepting the money. So instead of buy the people, which is BY, it's becoming BY. You buy the people so that you have the support. And for the people. For the people. However, the sad reality is instead of for, which is FOR, it's becoming FOOL, fool the people. We are sometimes being fooled by the words of the politician, by the words of our candidates, that we are being swayed of voting them. However, we need to understand that the government is for the people, not supposed to fool the people. That's the government ruled by many. A democratic government is a government ruled by many. And therefore, we need also to understand that democracy is could be a direct or indirect. Let's see what's the difference between the two. So direct or indirect or representative. Now, when we say direct democracy, it is the people who govern themselves right then and there. It means to say that when the people would like to construct a road, there's no need to call for a leader to construct. They themselves construct the road. So that's direct democracy. However, as time passes by, increase in population, the size of the territory are some of the considerations why direct democracy is just but a part of the small activity rather than of a wider perspective and a wider group. Direct democracy now is just focused on the barangay rather than in a wide scenario or a countrywide scenario. So in a countrywide scenario, it's more of a representative government where people are electing leaders on their behalf. That's why in our case, in the present situation, we elected President Duterte. Whether you voted for him or not, we cannot deny the fact that the people elected him and therefore he is the president. Leni Robredo, the vice president. We have the Senate president, Tito Soto, the Speaker of the House, Alan Peter Cayetano, the congressmen and the senator. They are just but an elected representative, and they are now the representative of the people. Our ideals, our beliefs, our wants are no longer exercised by us in terms of governmental function, but it is being exercised by our chosen representative. So that's the representative government. That's the essence of being a Republican. When we say Republic of the Philippines, the word republic means a Republican state is a government of representative. So it's a representative government. People leading the people are elected by the people. Then there is also the so-called presidential versus parliamentary government. A presidential government like the Republic of the Philippines, where the president is the head of the state and at the same time the head of the government. It's the presidential form of government. That's why our president represent both the affairs of the government and the affairs of the state. That's the role of the president in a presidential form of government. But in a parliamentary form of government, the, the prime minister is elected among the people elected, among the representatives elected. So the president or the prime minister in a parliamentary form of government is not a direct uh, elected official of the people, but the prime minister is elected from among the representative. And who elect them? The representatives themselves. Unlike in presidential form of government, it's the people who elect the president, and therefore it's also the people who can remove the president. But in a parliamentary form of government, it is easy to choose a new prime minister because only the members of the parliament elected by the people can remove the the prime minister on a no confidence vote. That's easy, but not in the presidential form of government. You need first to have another EDSA revolution in order to remove a sitting president of the Republic of the Philippines. How about a unitary and a federal government? When you say unitary, there is a uniform implementation of law from north to south, east to west. Unitary. So in the case of the Republic of the Philippines, there is one law from north to south. It is a uniform implementation. But in a federal form of government, it's a state within a state. This is a federal form of government. Look at the case of the United States of America. The United States of America is composed of 50 states. Each state has its own government, has its own laws, which is another to another state. So there is no uniform except that the federal government implements the, the federal law. But within the states, among the 50 states of the United States of America, each state has its own implementation of rules, has its own implementation of law. And therefore, you cannot say that this particular law is applicable in California and therefore it is also applicable in New York. No, because New York and California are two different states implementing two different laws which are maybe not acceptable to one and acceptable to the other, for example. So that's why in a federal form of government, it's a state with many states. That's the federal form of government. But in unitary form of government, it's united as one from north to south, from east to west. Then let's move to the fourth element of the state, which is sovereignty. What is sovereignty? Sovereignty is the supreme power to command obedience to its populace and freedom from foreign control. So, as you can see, in the definition of sovereignty, there are two kinds. One is internal and the other is external. So, when we say internal sovereignty, it means that the power to command obedience within the territorial jurisdiction of the state. That's why inside the Republic of the Philippines, as the case in review, or as in the case of the Republic of the Philippines, we have the implementation of laws within the territorial jurisdiction of the Philippines, and that is what we call the internal sovereignty. If you are caught violating, for example, traffic rules, that's internal policy, that's internal rules. We can be apprehended, or the police can apprehend, give you citation ticket, and then if you fail to pay, you can be incarcerated. That's part of the internal sovereignty of the state. There is also this, if there is internal sovereignty, there is also what we call the external sovereignty or freedom from foreign control, otherwise known as independence. Now, when we say freedom from foreign control, it means that another country cannot interfere into the affairs of another country because that is in violation of the sovereignty of the particular state. So, whatever is the size of the state, whatever is the economic status of the state, whatever is the feature of that particular state, nobody can encroach into its affairs simply because it is poor, it is limited in its people. We cannot do that, or that state cannot do that, because that is actually encroaching into the external sovereignty of the country or of the state. So it is important to know why there is a need to respect one's independence, because an encroachment of that in the independence of another will result to a war, because that's part of intruding into the affairs of the state. So we need to understand that external sovereignty is very important to the people, whether the uh, people living in a particular state is poor or whether that particular country is very small in population. Before the eyes of the United Nations and the existing agreements amongst states, every state is independent and nobody can encroach to the affairs of another. So I hope everybody is good after we were able to discuss the meaning of the state and the four elements of the state, and that we will be able to discuss further in the next online lecture. I hope you will be able to catch me once again, and I hope that I was able to share with you the things that you need to know about the state and its elements. Thank you so much.